Hey guys, it's BrainBean here, and I wanted to make a video to address the most common question that I get here on the channel, and that question is, which mechanical key switch is right for me? Well, really that's up to your personal preference, but I'm going to talk to you about the different key switches and how you can figure out which one you like the best. So let's take a look. So when you're getting into looking at mechanical keyboards, it can be a little bit overwhelming to see all the different options that you have when you have Cherry MX switches, Razer switches, Logitech's Romer G switch, and really, when you don't really know much about mechanical keyboards, you really wonder what's the big difference here? What makes all these switches unique? So that's what I'm going to talk about right now. Let's start with Cherry MX. So Cherry MX is one of the leading manufacturers of key switches and mechanical keyboards. This is partly due to their really good quality control, and they built up a great reputation for themselves for being sort of the industry standard for mechanical switches. So there's three main types that you'll see in gaming keyboards that are by far the most popular. So let's start with the Cherry MX Red switch. The Cherry MX Red switch is a linear switch, which means that it doesn't have any tactile feel when you push down on the key. You won't feel any bump or click as the key switch actually actuates. It's more of just a straight, smooth sliding motion until you bottom out the key. So a lot of people like the Cherry MX Red for gaming, particularly FPS style games or people that really feel like every second counts. Now, the reason they feel this way is because the switch doesn't have any bump or anything that kind of slows down their fingers, and it makes for a really nice, smooth experience when you're using these keys. Now, I do quickly just want to talk about the Cherry MX Speed switch as a bit of a side note, because if you've noticed in Corsair's new rapid fire keyboards, they use the new Cherry MX Speed switch. Now, I'm throwing this in here because the speed switch is essentially just a Cherry MX Red with the actuation distance cut down by almost half. So basically, it will still have a linear feel, no tactile bump, and it's basically, like I said, just a Cherry MX Red with a much shorter actuation distance. This can be a great option for somebody who feels like every split second counts and also doesn't mind having a very short key travel time when using their keyboard. The next most popular switch, which actually is probably one of the most popular switches, is the Cherry MX Brown switch, and the reason for this is because it's kind of a hybrid between the Cherry MX Blue, which we'll talk about next, and the Cherry MX Red. So the Cherry MX Brown does have a bit of a tactile bump, but it's also not loud and clicky like the Cherry MX Blue switch. So a lot of people like this switch because it still gives you a little bit of tactile feel so that you have that feeling, you know, you actuate the switch when you push it down. This is my personal favorite switch out of the Cherry MX switches because of that reason. So when I'm playing a game like an MMO or an RTS or something along those lines, I like to know exactly when that key switch actuates. And with the Cherry MX Red, if I gently push down that key, I may not know if I've actually cast that spell or used that ability, but with the Cherry MX Brown, I have that tactile feedback to know that I've used that skill. Okay, so on to the Cherry MX Blue switch. Now the Cherry MX Blue is kind of one of those iconic switches in that a lot of people associate mechanical keyboards with the sort of experience you get with the Cherry MX Blue. The Cherry MX Blue's distinct feature is that it has an audible click in addition to the tactile bump when you actuate the switch. This can drive some people crazy, especially family members, because it does get a little bit loud, especially if you're bottoming out the keys, so you have the click of the switch and the clack of the actual keycap bottoming out on the board. Now this switch is just as good for gaming as the Cherry MX Brown is, and in fact, Razer's switches, the Razer Green switch, is basically a Cherry MX Blue clone, which we'll talk about here in just a second. Okay, so the Logitech Romer G switch is a switch that Logitech developed in partnership with Omron, which is another key switch manufacturer. Now, the really cool thing about the Romer G switch is that it's built with sort of a boxy design where the switch kind of has this sort of shape to it, where in the middle there's an LED with a light pipe that funnels straight up into the back of the keycap. Now this makes for really bright and vibrant lighting in the letters on the keycaps themselves. It also lets all the secondary functions on the keycaps be illuminated, which is something that most other Cherry MX switches simply can't have because of the nature of using mechanical keys. Now this switch is kind of unique in that it offers a hybrid style feel between a membrane keyboard and a mechanical keyboard. If I had to describe exactly what it feels like a very mild Cherry MX Brown. You still get a little bit of tactile bump, but it's very difficult to notice, and it feels a little bit squishy when you bottom out the key. Now this makes them pretty quiet to use, and it's also really nice transition from somebody who's been using a membrane keyboard that's not sure if they want to get into mechanical keyboards. It's a really nice subtle transition. Okay, so let's talk about Razer's mechanical switch. Now, unfortunately, Razer's mechanical switches used to be plagued with a lot of quality control issues and had built up a little bit of a bad reputation. Now, because of this, they switched manufacturers from Kailh to Greetech, and because of this, they've had much better quality control, much better cohesiveness between all the keys on the board, and it's a much better feeling switch. I highly recommend the Razer Green Switch now, which as a couple of years ago, I definitely would not have recommended that switch. If you want to know more about all this, I'll leave a link in the description below where I cover all the information regarding Razer's Green Switch. Now, the Razer mechanical switches come in two varieties. They have the Razer Green, which is basically a clone of the Cherry MX Blue switch, so you have the audible click as well as tactile feedback. The only real difference is it has a slightly shorter actuation distance, so it's slightly faster, but I doubt anybody would really notice the difference. Now, the other switch they have is the Razer Orange switch, which is basically a clone of the Cherry MX Brown, but again has a little bit shorter actuation distance, but really not enough to notice too much of a difference. Okay, so we briefly covered all the different types of switches, but let's talk about how to figure out which one is best for you. Now, the number one biggest thing that I would recommend for anybody interested in these switches is get your hands on a keyboard and try these switches out for yourself. So you can do this a couple of different ways. You can go to a local tech store like a Best Buy or a Fry's or whatever you have in your area. Most of the time they have at least the most popular keyboards from the bigger manufacturers like Razer, Logitech, and Corsair, where you can go out there and try these keyboards out for yourself. Now just make sure you check out the box or even pull a keycap off on the keyboard to see which switch is on there. Now that's the best way to figure out which keycap is right for you. Now I know a lot of people don't have access to tech stores like these, and in this situation there's a wonderful product on the market by WASD Keyboards, which is a switch tester. Now this switch tester from WASD Keyboard comes with one of each different kind of Cherry MX switch, and it's the perfect way to really get your hands on the keys and figure out which one you like the feel of best. Again, I really recommend before you drop a bunch of money on a mechanical keyboard, spend the $15 that it costs to buy one of these switch testers so that you know for sure you're going to like the way it feels before you get it. Now, if you're interested in a board from Razer or Logitech, don't worry, you can still use the Cherry MX switch tester. Just keep in mind that the Razer Green feels very similar to the Cherry MX Blue, and if you like the way the blue feels on the switch tester, it's a pretty safe bet that you'll like the way the Razer Green feels. Just keep in mind that in my experience, the Razer Green feels like it has a little bit more crisper feeling in the click. Now the same thing goes for the Cherry MX Brown switch and the Razer Orange. Now the Razer Orange also feels very similar to the Cherry MX Brown, so if you like the way that Cherry MX Brown feels on the switch tester, it's a good bet that you'll probably like the Razer Orange. Now Logitech's Roamer G feels like a little bit squishier version of the Cherry MX Brown. They both have a pretty subtle tactile bump, but the Roamer G's main difference from the way the Cherry MX Brown will feel is that when you bottom out the key, instead of having a really rigid click, it's just a little bit squishier when you bottom it out. Now if you can't do any of these things, what I would recommend doing is at least read up on the switches and watch some videos that at least have sound tests about them. Now the sounds aren't going to make a huge difference for you, but a lot of people really care about the way the mechanical keyboard sounds because it is a little bit different than your traditional membrane keyboard use, because they're louder, they have more clicks and clacks and all that, so you can kind of get a feel for the switch just by listening to it, but that's typically only if you've had experience with mechanical keyboards. Well, that's it for this video, guys. I really hope it helps you out. I know it's very overwhelming to figure out which key switch you would like to buy. In fact, this is what got me involved in making YouTube videos, because when I got into buying my first mechanical keyboard, I had a really hard time deciding on the right one. I watched a lot of videos and I found that most of them didn't answer the questions that I had, so I took it upon myself to start creating videos that answered the questions that I had personally, so hopefully I could spare some people the agony that I had trying to figure out which one was right for me. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up to show your support, and be sure to subscribe to my channel for more videos like this in the future. You can also follow me on Twitter at BrainBean Gaming, and as always, thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you guys next time.